Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie remember their childhood not in fragments of scandal but in the warmth of their mother's resilience. Sarah Ferguson faced public humiliation, tabloid invasions, and deep personal betrayal, yet what her daughter saw was laughter, strength, and an unwavering presence. Their reflections cast a sharp contrast against Prince Andrew's quiet detachment. For all his royal status, it was Sarah who became the emotional center of the household, carrying the weight of both parenting and public pressure.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
Her steadiness, even amid chaos, made a lasting imprint, one that outshone palace protocols and titles. This emotional clarity from the next generation draws a line back to Susan Barantez's unflinching critique. What truly undermined the marriage was not scandal or scrutiny, but Andrew's inability to provide the dependable emotional partnership Sarah needed. Through her daughter's memories and her mother's voice, a different truth emerges, one that holds character, not crisis, at the center of what went wrong. When Sarah Ferguson married Prince Andrew in 1986, it looked like a royal fairy tale. The red-haired commoner turned Duchess of York was seen as a breath of fresh air, bringing warmth and relatability to a monarchy steeped in centuries of decorum. Over 500 million people watched their wedding. There were smiles, carriages, tiaras, and for a moment, it felt like something real was happening behind palace gates. She charmed the public, laughing openly, cracking jokes, and shaking up royal stiffness. People called her Foji, like she was one of them, not realizing that behind the bright smiles and royal wave, things were already starting to crack. The palace-approved fantasy barely lasted beyond the honeymoon. Prince Andrew, the so-called spare, was in and out of the country constantly thanks to his naval career. While Sarah stayed behind trying to figure out royal life, Andrew was off at sea for weeks, sometimes months, at a time. And this wasn't just some cute long-distance thing. The emotional gap widened fast. Sarah had to do the public royal thing alone, while also raising two daughters with a husband who was more of a symbol than presence. And the reality is, according to someone who knew them both intimately, this wasn't just about scheduling. It was about character, or more specifically, the lack of it. Because as charming as Andrew could be, Susan Barantez, Sarah's mother, didn't mince words. She said it plainly. Andrew didn't have the character needed to make a marriage last. This wasn't some cryptic royal commentary. Susan called it out directly. She said Andrew lacked dependability, emotional resilience, and consistency. She saw through the royal gloss and pinned the failure of the marriage on who Andrew was, not what the media portrayed. For her, it wasn't about scandal. It was about substance, or the absence of it. That insight hit differently because Susan wasn't a royal insider or distant relative. She was Sarah's mother. And she wasn't blinded by palaces or protocols. She saw what her daughter was living through behind closed doors. The lavish wedding and royal titles didn't matter when the man at the center of it all couldn't show up emotionally day after day. By the early 1990s, the facade had all but shattered. Their separation was announced in 1992, and by 1996, the divorce was finalized. But that timeline doesn't capture how chaotic it got. Sarah, feeling abandoned and emotionally stranded, acted out. She began inviting lovers to social events. Tabloid photos of her sunbathing topless with her toes in a man's mouth didn't help. But while the press feasted on scandal, the real rut was already deep. The breakdown wasn't just about bad press. It was about a marriage with no emotional core. The affection had curdled into mutual tolerance, and the palace's silent code of suffering only made things worse. The relationship didn't explode, it just slowly stopped breathing. Through all this, Sarah never collapsed in front of her children. Princess Beatrice remembers her mother as a force of joy. She's spoken about how Sarah created warmth and laughter in a house that easily could have drowned in silence. She remembers the strength her mother showed, shielding them from the public chaos and emotional coldness that trickled in from the other side of the marriage. Beatrice's memories aren't about scandal, they're about resilience. Sarah kept the household emotionally alive, even as her own marriage was dying. And that matters, because the emotional barometer of a royal household is rarely taken from the official statements. It's taken from the kids. Princess Eugenie tells a similar story. She's publicly described her mother as the one who held things together, who kept their home full of color energy, and openness. While Andrew was often distant, physically and emotionally, it was Sarah who made the royal experience feel human, even when the system around them was anything but. Their reflections don't rewrite history, but they definitely reframe it. They point to a family dynamic where the mother was emotionally present and the father was more of a figurehead. That speaks volumes when you're trying to understand not just a failed marriage, but a fractured royal structure. Even after their divorce, Sarah and Andrew continued living together at Royal Lodge. That decision wasn't just about convenience, it was a deliberate choice. Publicly, they maintained a united front, raising eyebrows and sparking rumors, but never giving the tabloids what they really wanted: drama. They presented themselves as a modern, post-divorce family that refused to let legal separation tear apart decades of shared life. That doesn't mean things were perfect, but it does show a strange kind of loyalty that outlived the romance. Whether it was love, habit, or mutual protection, the connection didn't disappear after the papers were signed. Within the wider royal family, the Sarah and Andrew situation has...
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
always been a bit of an outlier. Most royal divorces end in cold silence or quiet exile. This one didn't. And maybe that's because Sarah, despite everything, still treated Andrew like family, and vice versa. They weren't just co-parents. They were confidants. Occasionally, they even appeared at events together, smiling, posing, as if the 1996 divorce never happened. It was a confusing image, especially in a royal system obsessed with clean lines and perfect optics. But it forced people to rethink what royal separation could look like. Compared to more recent royal narratives, like that of Princess Catherine and Prince William, the Ferguson-Andrew breakup feels messier, rawer, and more human. There was no script for how to handle emotional absence when the cameras weren't rolling. There was no public empathy buffer like we've seen in modern times. Sarah had to navigate her pain in a media landscape that was far less forgiving and a royal structure that was far less flexible. The sadness of that era hangs over many of her public appearances from the time, often smiling, but never quite at ease. She became the symbol of a royal wife who didn't fit the mold, and paid the price for it. In retrospect, the deeper insight from Susan Barantes holds up uncomfortably well. Andrew's public image has continued to degrade, particularly with his associations in later years that sparked scandal beyond the marriage. His lack of judgment, his failure to take accountability, these weren't new traits. They were already visible during his marriage. What Susan called lack of character has shown itself again and again. It wasn't just about being a poor husband. It was about lacking the personal integrity to carry the weight of public and private responsibility. And while scandals grabbed headlines, it was that core flaw that quietly pulled everything down from the inside. Through all the royal fog and headlines, Sarah Ferguson became something rare, a divorced duchess who never fully left. She didn't retreat into the countryside or vanish from public life. She kept showing up at charity events, family occasions, even coronations. It was unconventional, and at times awkward, but it was undeniably her. For someone who was supposedly exiled after the divorce, Sarah remained weirdly close to the heart of the royal family. It was like she belonged, but on her own terms. And in a world where image is everything, that kind of persistence takes nerve. Or maybe just survival instincts honed by years of being fed to the tabloids. Meanwhile, Andrew never quite found his footing post-divorce. His public appearances grew fewer, and his reputation, already bruised, took hit after hit. While Sarah rebuilt her identity outside the palace, Andrew seemed frozen in time. Same titles, same house, same inability to adapt. The comparison is hard to ignore. Sarah evolved. Andrew stagnated. And in a quiet way, that's a final confirmation of Susan Barantes' point. Character isn't about what you project on a balcony. It's about how you handle life when the spotlight dims and the support system falls away. Within the palace walls, Sarah's continued presence was both tolerated and quietly strategic. She knew things. She understood the system. She played by its rules and then survived breaking them. And most importantly, she didn't embarrass the institution the way Andrew would in later years. So while other ex-royals disappeared into the royal history books, Sarah remained orbiting the crown like a rogue planet. Never officially back in, but never fully cast out. It was unprecedented, but so was she. And somehow, the monarchy just kept adjusting around her. Beatrice's adult life has been full of those blurred royal boundaries. Her wedding in 2020, scaled down due to the pandemic, was held at Royal Lodge, the same house her divorced parents still shared. Her mother helped with the details. Her father walked her down the aisle, and there they all were, together, as if the last 3 decades hadn't been tabloid fodder. It was a moment that symbolized more than a marriage. It was the clearest example of how the royal concept of family, whatever that means anymore, can twist and reshape itself without fully breaking. That wedding didn't just unite Beatrice with her husband. It reasserted Sarah's permanent place in the family narrative. Eugenie has spoken often about how her mother was her anchor. Through scandal, divorce, and endless paparazzi flashbulbs, Sarah kept showing up. Not perfectly, but consistently. And in the royal world, consistency is rare, especially when the official family structure tries to move on without you. Eugenie's memories aren't just emotional. They're instructive. They show that presence matters more than protocol. That laughing in the kitchen sometimes carries more weight than standing silently in designer coats on the palace balcony. And if the daughters are the emotional historians of this story, their verdict is clear. Sarah was the one who stayed real. And then there's Royal Lodge, the quiet setting for all this post-divorce drama. It's not just a house. It's a symbol of unresolved dynamics. Sarah and Andrew have shared it for over 2 decades since their legal separation, creating a bizarre, cohabiting arrangement that nobody can quite define. Were they back together? Were they just roommates? Was it some royal cost-saving measure? The palace never confirmed anything. But the message was clear. Emotional ties don't always end with the legal ones. Sometimes they linger. Sometimes they turn into something new. And sometimes they stay exactly the same, forever. Even the Queen, who had every reason to draw strict lines, seemed to accept the Sarah and Andrew dynamic for what it was. There were no public rebukes, no ISIS statements. In fact, Sarah was regularly invited to Balmoral. That doesn't happen unless the monarch signs off. And if Elizabeth II made space for Sarah, then that says something. Maybe she saw the same thing her granddaughters did, a woman who weathered a public storm and came out intact. Or maybe she understood that some bonds, no matter how unorthodox, still hold value in a family defined by duty and dysfunction. In contrast, modern royal marriages like William and Catherine's are measured in optics. The image of stability is everything. But Sarah and Andrew's marriage was the exact opposite. It was emotionally unfiltered, publicly messy, defined more by how it fell apart than how it started. And yet, ironically, the aftermath feels more emotionally honest. There's no curated perfection in Sarah's story, no photo ops to hide behind. Just decades of co-parenting, public awkwardness, and reluctant affection that refused to vanish after the vows ended. It's messy, but it's real. When Meghan Markle entered the royal fold, comparisons to Sarah Ferguson were inevitable. Both were outsiders. Both faced a media machine that treated them like tabloid meat. And both pushed back against a palace system that didn't quite know what to do with outspoken women who refused to blend in. But the key difference? Meghan left entirely. Sarah stayed. That doesn't make one better than the other, but it does show how different their paths became. Sarah played a long game, adapting instead of escaping. Meghan chose freedom over endurance. 2 sides of the same coin, both shaped by a system that still punishes. Prince Harry, too, grew up watching that royal dysfunction play out firsthand. He knew what it looked like when love clashed with duty and when public image drowned personal happiness. He saw it in his own home, and likely in his uncle and aunt's fractured dynamic. And maybe that's part of why he walked away. Maybe Sarah and Andrew's saga showed him what happens when you try to play by royal rules while protecting your emotional life. Maybe the lesson he took wasn't from their wedding, but from their divorce. So how do you define a royal relationship that outlives a marriage but never remarries? That shares a home but never shares a bed? That ended legally but not emotionally? Sarah Ferguson's entire post-divorce life is that contradiction. She never rebranded, never remarried, never really left. Instead, she built a strange kind of resilience around it. The kind that can show up at charity events with her ex-husband and smile through the whispers. The The kind that can laugh on morning talk shows about being a family unit with a man she hasn't been married to in decades. It's not traditional, but then again, she never was. For Andrew, that enduring closeness with Sarah may be one of the few things keeping him tethered to whatever is left of his public image. Because as his reputation deteriorated, through scandal, poor decisions, and a complete lack of accountability, Sarah was still there, not defending everything, but never walking away. Even as the rest of the royal family started inching their chairs back, Sarah sat tight, not necessarily in approval, but in loyalty. And maybe that says something uncomfortable, that even when Andrew couldn't sustain a marriage, Sarah still believed in something lasting beyond it. Beatrice, shaped by all this ambiguity, appears remarkably grounded. Maybe it because she saw her parents navigate chaos without turning it into war. There was no public bitterness, no custody battles, no tabloid he said, she said. Just two parents who figured out how to make something livable out of something broken. She's spoken in interviews with calm clarity about her upbringing, crediting both her mother's joy and her father's calm. And even though those traits may have masked deeper dysfunction, they created an emotional buffer that many royal children never got. She grew up in a house with emotional noise, but not emotional neglect. Eugenie echoed that feeling in her wedding speech, publicly thanking her parents for teaching her how to love without conditions. It was subtle, but pointed. She didn't say, "Thank you for staying together." She said, "Thank you for sticking together." There's a difference, and for children raised under a royal roof, that distinction matters. The legacy Sarah and Andrew passed down wasn't about a perfect marriage. It was about the possibility of continued respect, of showing up even after it all falls apart. It wasn't romantic, but it was steady. And in the Windsor world, where everything is fragile and performative, steadiness counts for a lot. Now, with Royal Lodge reportedly in the final chapter of its royal occupants, the symbolism is thick. The house that kept Sarah and Andrew under one roof, divorced but united, is slipping out of their hands. Whether they go quietly or not, the end of their cohabitation marks the end of an era they crafted entirely on their own terms. It also closes a book on one of the strangest love stories in the Windsor saga. Not because of how it began, but because of how stubbornly it refused to end. And as they pack their things and leave the estate that kept their dynamic alive for decades, the questions hang in the air. Was it love? Was it codependence? Or just even Camilla, whose royal journey has been no less controversial, never dealt with the kind of lingering entanglement that Sarah managed. Camilla and Charles had scandal. They had exile. But once they were in. Clean break, no ambiguity. Sarah? She stayed in the margins. She wasn't a mistress. She wasn't a wife. She was an emotional limbo in a tiara. And unlike Camilla, she didn't marry back in to fix the narrative. She let the gray area define her. And that made her an ongoing problem for a royal machine that thrives on clarity, hierarchy, and permanent titles. And if Sarah's story sounds eerily familiar, it's because we watched another royal couple push back against tradition in recent years, just in a different direction. Harry and Meghan broke the mold by leaving completely. Sarah broke it by never fully going. But both paths exposed the brittleness of royal expectations. Both women were branded as trouble. Both faced relentless press attacks. Both resisted the scripted version of royal womanhood that demands obedience over authenticity. But while Meghan took her story into her own hands with interviews and Netflix deals, Sarah sat tight, never writing a tell-all, never torching the bridge. That silence wasn't out of fear. It was strategy. Sarah learned that if you're loud, the palace shuts its doors. But if you're quiet enough to be useful, they leave the door open, just a crack. She walked that line better than anyone. Publicly supportive, privately complex, and always close enough to the crown to stay relevant. And somehow, even with all the toe-sucking headlines, financial scandals, and exile rumors, Sarah stayed on the Christmas card list. The royal family might not have loved her methods, but they never truly rejected her. That says a lot about image. But it says even more about what they quietly, princess and famously no-nonsense and allergic to drama, once described royal duty as just getting on with it. That attitude couldn't be more opposite from Sarah's messier, media-friendly path. But even and, with a stiff upper lip, reportedly kept things cordial with a duchess who wouldn't leave. Because in the end, Sarah wasn't a threat. She was a reminder, a living example of what happens when the crown tries to squeeze individuality into a corset of duty and fails. Her very existence challenged the idea that royals must disappear after scandal. She didn't. She just kept showing up. Now, as William and Catherine tried to model the perfect 21st century royal couple, the shadow of failed royal marriages lingers. It's a cautionary tale playing silently behind every photo op. The royals know now what they didn't fully grasp back in the 80s, that emotional substance can't be replaced with pageantry. Sarah and Andrew were mismatched long before the press ever noticed. But their real failure wasn't public. It was personal. A lack of character, as Sarah's mother bluntly put it, doesn't scream in the tabloids. It festers in quiet moments. It shows up in absence, in avoidance, in the refusal to evolve. In the end, Sarah Ferguson didn't just survive a royal divorce. She rewrote the script, not by burning bridges, but by living in the ruins and turning them into something functional. She showed that loyalty doesn't always come with a title, and that emotional resilience speaks louder than public image. Her mother's words still echo. The issue was never the scandals. It was a character. So what do you think? Was Sarah's loyalty empowering or enabling? Was this the most underrated royal saga of them all? Drop your thought below, because you know this story isn't done. And if you're into the mess behind the monarchy, don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. More royal chaos is always just one scandal away.